The adventurers had fought long and hard through the dungeon of graves. Many a great treasure they had won, but heavy was the cost. Many allies and friends had passed over death's long threshold to allow them to make it to this moment. And the worst part was that the fallen, they were inside, there in the final chamber with Orcus, the demon prince of undeath. For restless are the dead in the dungeon of graves. The heroes entered the profane sanctum and took the fight to the Bloodlord. They struck many a mighty blow and cast powerful magics, but in the end, it was apparent that they would not be enough. It's at this moment that one of my players asked if he could do something that was not in the rules. Today we're going to talk about the rule of cool. What it is, when should you use it, and if you should even allow it in your games. Greetings and salutations, YouTube. I am the Nemean Beard. I am your host and your guide today. I hope that you're staying safe and healthy. I'm praying for you guys. I'm going to take a drink of this coffee and give you some time to mosey on over to the subscribe button. If you hit that and the like, I would really appreciate that. This is Black Silk again, Folgers brand. Still have pretty much the same feeling that I have about most grocery store offerings. It's not burnt. It tastes vaguely like coffee, and it's affordable. Oh, and it supposedly has caffeine, so that's a plus. A friend had recently asked, what is the rule of cool? More to the point, he asked, what's up with all the memes about the rule of cool? What is that? And as always with any topic, I think it's good to get a strong working definition. The rule of cool is when a player attempts something that isn't strictly defined by the rules or attempts something out of the character's capacity within a said rule set. That narrative, the DM, that he or she decides, he says, that's cool, I'll allow that. Now, some people love this. Some people hate it. I think both sentiments are valid. I would say that if you like the fiat type mechanic, you like that type of game, maybe you should play like Fate or something. And if this idea ruins the experience for you, I can't tell you not to play D&D because D&D has its set of rules that you should play by, right? But you might try like a simulation of D&D, like Descent or Gloomhaven or something like that. You may enjoy that much better. Now, when it comes to the rule of cool, I say yes unless it ruins the fun for someone else. For me, if I wanted to play a game that was really confined inside an unyielding set of mechanics and rules, I probably would just play video games all the time. And one of the reasons I love D&D is that you can attempt things outside the box. I'm pretty sure in an early edition of Dungeons and Dragons, maybe in the original D&D rules, Gary Gygax said that the rules that we've written down, that we presented here, are guidelines, and you're only limited by your imagination. Now, don't mistake the rule of cool with just ad-libbing a scene and making it sound cool, right? So let's say my friend Dave, he has an elven archer. His adventuring party is fighting a band of orcs on the precipice of this ruined watchtower. Seeing his friend's wizard beset by an orc tank, he decides that instead of shooting the orc with arrows, he will attempt a running drop kick to knock the orc off the ledge. Now, this is perfectly legal. Dave has enough movement. He has the actions to do so. All he needs to do is make some rolls, and then we can go from there. So you could say, roll athletics, roll unarmed attack, roll opposed strength. Okay, you succeed. You knock the orc off. That's not very dramatic. That's not very narrative. That's very mechanical. And there's nothing wrong with that. Or you could describe and narrate the scene. You scream in desperation, wanting to save your friend. Rushing forth, you throw caution to the wind. Approaching the ledge, you see the orc lift his jagged axe above his head, readying the killing blow. You launch yourself toward the orc, spearing your feet out, becoming the arrow, and you crash into the orc. The green-skinned warrior stumbles back, trying to maintain his footing, but his heavy armor continues to pull him backwards, and he goes over the edge, screaming all the way down. Now that's cool, but that's totally allowed in the rules. That's just cool narration. I mean, I thought it was okay. You guys can probably do better. So by the rule of cool, that's allowing things that not only sit outside the rule set, but also kind of overrule the already taxed suspension of disbelief that we have when playing a fantasy game like this. I mean, we're already elves and orcs and dragons, magic and talking weapons and things like that. I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but I have seen it ruin some games. Now, I personally, as a DM, enjoy when my players challenge me with what they want to do. You can always say no. I mean, because you could not use the daggers your ally is throwing into a wall and as climbing handholds in other games. You could not allow your paladin to interpose himself between a Death Knight's lance and the party's thief in other games. I tend to say yes, and I tend to do things like that, but I do have some guidelines. So I thought what I would do today is kind of share some of my thoughts about how I say yes or no to the rule of cool. Um, what I do say no to is when the players try to bend things just to their advantage, just so they can be like uber powered NPC bullies, or if they try crazy stuff against other characters for no real reason other than, hey, I want to be an avatar of chaos. Now, I do say yes to the rule of cool when it's improbable, not impossible. Like, it doesn't matter how many natural 20s you roll, your guy can't jump the Grand Canyon. It's dramatic, it's heroic, it costs the player something, and it puts them at great risk. I'm going to say that again because I kind of chopped that up. I do say yes when it's improbable, not impossible, improbable, when it's dramatic and heroic, and it's going to cost the character something. It's going to put them at risk. It was my son's last game with me, with us, our group, before he left for basic training. We had been going through Rapanathuk. I don't actually know how you say that, by the way, so if there's someone out there that is a Nazi about how you say it, I shouldn't say Nazi. If you're a stickler for how you say it, I apologize. But we've been going through Rapanathuk using Dungeon Crawl Classics rule set. If you haven't ever tried DCC, it's really quite amazing and fun. Give it a shot. But in the final battle, things were getting quite rough. And really, I wanted to end on a heroic note, not a total party kill. So my son's character, he was a dwarf named Roku, and he was going toe to toe with Orcus. He wasn't the only one up there, but he was kind of the main fighter up there. Now in the DCC system, excuse me. In the DCC system, spellcasters, they can exceed their normal casting abilities by attempting what is called spell burn. Blood doth aid great sorcery, as they say. Now you can offer up like ability points and life force and some other things, I think, and you do that. You pay that cost regardless if your attempt works or not. But warrior classes like the dwarf, they don't really have that option. But he asked if he could offer his life to his god for a large bonus. I determined that Roke, the god of the dwarves in my setting, agreed. FYI, that tells you something about the naming convention of the dwarves in my world. The U sound at the end of the names in Dwarvish is one of the titles that means son, daughter, or in the lineage of. So my son's dwarf, by his reckoning, was in the direct lineage of his god. So my son, so I tell him I tell him what the bonus is, and he rolls like a 19 or 20, and his normal bonus is decent, and I think I had said between 7 to plus 10 for his sacrificial strike. Sacrificial strike. There's no real chart for this, so I describe as Roku, my son's dwarf, swings down and catches Orcus square in the chest and cleaves him from sternum to hip, spilling Orcus's guts all over the dwarf's boots. Then I also talk about how the spectral version of, I gotta find my notes here, Elos Mord, the hammer that creates and destroys, wielded by the god Rock, appears and squashes Orcus into Demon Lord paste. That was outside the rules. Technically, that's not really allowed to happen, and a lot can happen in DCC. But one of the biggest issues is that once you allow something like this, players will try it all the time. And once you've allowed it for one player, it's really hard to tell another no. It can feel unfair and unbalanced. And remember, we've agreed to have fun together as a collective. Well, actually, I don't think I've talked about the social contract. Maybe that's a future video. Now, in my example, it was improbable, it was unlikely, it was dramatic and heroic, and it did cost him something. He expected Roku to die right then and there, but I let him live for like a year and a day because that sounds cooler in the narrative. Now, the rule of cool is the prerogative of the DM, and you're free to say yes or no at any time. But some players will be much better at convincing you. The more extrovert type players, they might have an advantage with their penchant for narrating characters' actions, asking every question that comes into their brain. Whereas maybe a player that has a more wallflower type personality, they may never attempt anything of the sort. So don't be afraid to bring it up too. Like, you could run over and throw your shield out in front of this arrow. Now, if you don't roll well, you're probably going to take some major damage, or you might miss entirely, and the wizard could die. So don't be afraid to throw things out there that necessarily aren't in the action scheme or the economy of, D&D 5th edition has a pretty set way that you can do your actions, with actions, move actions, bonus actions, reactions, things like that. So, but if you want to use that, don't be afraid to do that. But make it not sure. Make them not sure if they're going to succeed. Improbable. Make them take a risk and don't do it all the time. Like, no one cares if you block a goblin's claw. You somehow manage to run across the room and block a goblin's claw. Saying all the words now. Nobody cares about that. But if it means something, if it's dramatic, and if it costs them something, then it becomes important. So I like to use it sparingly, especially if you're new. What you don't want is the players to assume that it's always in effect. In my view, using the rule of cool is kind of akin to tapping into forces beyond their kin. These forces demand something. I like the idea of spell burn because you pay for it regardless if you succeed. Finally, make them weigh that risk versus reward, but don't give them a lot of time to decide. Not only is there a cost, but there needs to be spectacular consequences as well. If you have a story about the rule of cool, let me know. I would love to hear about it in the comments. And that, in short, is a bit about the rule of cool. And really, it's up to you as a DM whether you use it or not. I side with yes, unless everyone at my table is against it. Well, until we meet again, game well.